Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark, and we are in 2 Timothy chapter 3. We're continuing in verse 4 this lesson, but before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16. Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, as we continue on in this list of 19 sins that Paul mentions to Timothy will take place in the last days, we come on here to verse 4, and he says, traitors, heady, high-minded. Now, we looked at heady last lesson, which means that people act before they think. They do things out of impulse. And then high-minded, meaning that they people who want to have the importance upon them. They want to get to the glory for whatever they do for God, teaching Sunday school or singing in the choir or leading in the music ministry or preaching or Bible study. They want the glory. And yet Christians need to be people of humility and to give God the glory. Now we come into the last part, and he says, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. Now, and again, this brings us right back to where we began this list from. People placing their own desires and their own wishes as the priority of their life. I've said it many times already. I'm going to say it again. What's the first sin that was mentioned in this list? Lovers of their own self. Lovers of their own self, right? And here it's lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. So people place their own desires and their own wishes as their priority of their life. They put self first, ahead of God. They value this temporal pleasure, whatever this temporal pleasure is, they value it higher than an eternal and an all-loving King of the universe. They would rather have this pleasure, whatever it is, more than to have God's life, God's acceptance in their life. They would rather satisfy their appetite than to please God. And we see it today. We see people, unsaved people today, Christians too sometimes get involved in it, where they're doing something to please their own appetite, their own fleshly lust, right? Whether it's a lust of the flesh, a lust of the eyes, or a pride of life. Christians can get deceived and caught into the same trick, right? The same trick of the enemy, to be a lover of themselves more than a lover of God. In this area of their life, this area of this Christian's life, they want to please themselves. And they don't care about God. They'll come back to God later. They'll come back to God later, but they'll come back repenting, confessing their sin. So he says in verse 4, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. And then verse 5 says, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. In the last days, there will be people who not only carry in their hearts the sins that have been mentioned in verses 2 through 4, but also they will be churchgoers, professing Bible believers, which are quick to say, God bless you, right? Or they quick to at the end of a prayer say amen. And they do it as long as it benefits who? Them. As long as it benefits them. It comes back to them. Selfishness, self-enthronement. They have a form of godliness, but they deny the power thereof. They have the outward form but they are not changed within. Jesus called these people tares. Jesus also said that they are wolves that wear sheep's clothing, that they are whited tombs that house dead bones. All their orthodox is outside and nothing inside. You have to be careful of the whited sepulchres, of the tares in the church. Now, Jesus said that, there's going to be tares in the church. There's going to be people here, people in churches that have a form of godliness, but they don't know God. They don't have God's power in their hearts. They've never been saved. They've never been washed in the blood. And we need to be careful of them. And these people, again, he's mentioning these 19 sins here. What? They'll be lovers of themselves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minders, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. And what? All a person that does these things can, in the end, that's all that's in their heart. In the end, amen. Amen, brother. Right? Or, right? They have a form of godliness, but they deny the power thereof. Right? They'll pat you on the back. When the time is right, they pat you on. God bless you. God bless you. Right? Right? Say a prayer for me, or say a prayer for something. And they have no intention. It's all for themselves. It all makes them look good. Right? It all makes them look good in the eyes of other people. So they have a form of godliness, but they deny the power of God. And then he says here in verse 5, the last part, from such turn away. Turn away. Paul says to Timothy, and God is saying to you and me today, from these people, turn away. Now, this Greek word for turn away is apotrepo, and it's in the middle voice. And this is the only place in the New Testament where this Greek word apotrepo is used. Now, the middle voice means that to turn yourself away. You are to turn yourself away. Remember, active voice means I produce the action of the verb. Passive voice means I receive the action of the verb. Middle voice means I produce and I receive the action of the verb. So when it's in the middle, it means not only do I produce it, but I'm also receiving the benefits of it. So turn yourself away means that you are to turn away from these people. They have a form of godliness. Turn away from the boasters, the proud, and the arrogant people. Turn away from them. Don't be tempted by the enemy to follow anyone's examples of these 19 sins that are mentioned. Listen, it's in all of us. But our sinful flesh desires to fulfill these sins in our life. But as Paul stated in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 5, that we are to mortify, we are to put to death the sinful desires and the lusts of our flesh and of our mind. Listen, your flesh and my flesh wants to do these sins. We have a nature within us. It's a sinful nature, and it wants to disobey God. It loves it. That sinful nature that's within us loves to disobey God. It loves to hate. It loves to false accuse. It loves to be proud. It loves to be disobedient to parents. But Paul says, mortify these lusts, mortify these deeds of our flesh. Always, always, as in Psalm 16, verse 8, always set the Lord before you, right? David said, I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be moved, right? Always set the Lord before you and seek God as the portion of your heart. Psalm 73, right? 25 and 26. Whom have I in heaven but thee? And there is none upon earth that I desire beside thee, right? My flesh and my heart faileth, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Make God the portion of your heart, right? Make God the portion of your heart. Don't make these sins the portion. Don't make your sinful flesh, the lusts of your flesh, the portion of your heart. As we die to self and live unto God, the blessings will flow from God. The more we're selfish, the less blessed we're gonna be from God. But the more we die to self, the more we mortify the deeds of our flesh, we put them to death, then the more God's blessing comes to our life and to our hearts. So he says here in verse 5, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, from all of these sins, from the sins of this, turn away from them, right? Turn away, put them to death. Not only turn away from people that do it, but also turn away from it in your own heart. Turn away from the desire to do these sins in your own heart. You may say, Pastor Mark, I would never do some of these sins here. Oh, yes, you would. Yes, you would if you had the that it's within all of us. That sinful nature is within all. We have the ability in our sinful nature to do any one of those sins. We need to realize that. We need to humble ourselves to God. Right? And then he says here in verse 6, for of this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with divers lusts, right? And so he says here, for of this sort, and he's referring back to the group of people that are mentioned in verses 2 through 5. This sinful people, this list of sins, the people that do them. For of this sort are they which what? Creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with diverse lusts. They creep into houses. This Greek word is enduno. And the first part is en, which means in, and then duno means to enter. So it means they enter in, and it carries the idea of putting on a garment. By deceitful and cunning works, they wind their way into the houses of silly and unsuspecting women. This is like what Paul just said back in verse 5. They dress themselves up in the form of godliness, but it's only outward show, and there's nothing inward. It's like what he said. They have a form of godliness. Some people, they put this cloak on, this religious cloak on, and they think, well, I'm religious now. I'm wearing this religious garment, right? I just said amen. I just said, oh, God bless you. So this must make me religious, right? No, the deceitfulness is still within. But he says they creep into houses. These people that have a form of godliness, they use their deception to be able to creep into houses and to deceive people about what they're really like. All right? We're going to continue on next lesson, but until then, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.